Hi, this is Unsuitable with Mary B. Safrit, the podcast where I interview single Christians about their lives and faith. Welcome to the very first episode of Season 3. Just like last season, this one was going to be split into a few different series, which are focused around a different theme. We're kicking things off with 4 interviews on self-awareness and growth. Each of the guests comes at this theme from a slightly different place, and I can't wait for you to hear from all of them. First, you're going to hear from PJ Rasmussen. He's a composer, guitarist, and the founder of the Boardwalk Jazz Band, which is New York's only 21-piece band to feature 4 singers. PJ has headlined 2 national TV specials, been featured on the cover of Hot House Jazz magazine, headlined at the Four Seasons restaurant in New York, and landed 2 albums on the jazz charts. His band has a single coming out December 6th and has a new nationally syndicated TV show called An American Christmas, which is airing this December. It's headlined by WCBS in New York. You'll get more details on those in the episode, and I'll post links in the episode description. As a fellow musician and composer, I feel like PJ and I could have talked about music for the entire episode, but we didn't. Only a bit at the beginning. PJ talks about the challenges of being emotionally driven and male. We talk about how it's affected his relationships with women, his view of himself, and how he's become aware of the positive aspects of being emotionally driven. He's got a really interesting perspective, so let's hear what he has to say. Hi, PJ. Welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here, especially on as you have a deadline tomorrow.
Yeah, it's exciting. It's exciting. This was my how I got out of the house today.
Oh, I feel that.
Yeah.
I feel when I have a deadline, it's like just barricaded wherever I'm working. So I'm glad to be that excuse for you.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah. So your deadline is a composition deadline. You're working on a piece for an orchestra in Florida, and you also are a jazz musician and composer. Can you talk a little bit about how you got into the world of composition and jazz?
Yeah, I mean, I fell in love with music as a kid, and really it was actually I always say that I fell in love with music in the car with my parents, because we would always be listening to music.
Yeah.
The only time we weren't listening was if either we were in trouble or there was a big life lesson being taught at the moment. So, I mean, it was always on. I remember getting picked up in like 6th grade to go over to a friend's house, and they turned the radio on, and then the mom started asking me questions, and I was like really confused.
We're talking during the music?
I know. I was like, if we're turning the music on,
we are listening.
Yeah, it was very confusing. I mean, it was not like a rule. It just was kind of what happened, and watching my mom and dad sing and just have so much fun with it. I mean, that's how I got into it. And then I got into it really seriously when I saw Eric Clapton on TV. He had this, it was like a pay-per-view, free view thing from his One More Car, One More Rider tour, which is an amazing album, actually. I still adore it all these years later. And it was on every night for like a month, and I bet I watched it 20 times.
Wow.
And it was just so cool. And so that was really the thing that made me want to go from just kind of playing with my dad for fun, playing guitar, to like, oh, no, I want to do this. That's the coolest thing ever. Real. Yeah. So, and then I got into jazz later in high school. That was just an evolution of being obsessed with sounds and being obsessed with new things. I mean, I grew up on the Beatles and classic rock, and eventually jazz. And now I have a arranging deadline for the Florida Imperial Symphony, and it's the same thing. It's just new sounds. It's fun. So keeps me out of trouble anyway.
Yeah, for sure. And so now you have a jazz band?
Yeah, it's a 21-piece thing, the Boardwalk Jazz Band.
Band, okay.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure if band or orchestra was appropriate.
Yeah, well, it's kind of both.
A little both, right? Because that's a pretty big pretty big ensemble.
So it's a big band, literally as a description, but big band actually is also a description of the instruments involved. It's piano, bass, guitar, drums, and 13 horns and 4 vocalists.
Okay.
So that's a lot of fun. We actually have a Christmas show coming up. We have it's an American Christmas. It's a national television broadcast. I'm excited about it. It's going to air during December. I know we just got NBC in Chicago to sign on.
Oh, awesome.
If I were really on top of my game, I would have checked to see if we picked up our New York station yet. We were on CBS last year.
Oh, fun.
So
Wow,
it's
that's
it's
awesome.
great. So you'll definitely be able to see us.
So did you study composition in school as well, in college?
I was a guitar performance
Okay.
major, jazz
Okay.
performance for guitar. I didn't get into composing until really after college.
Okay.
The first song I remember writing was my freshman year of college. First song, jazz song I remember writing. I mean, I grew up doing singer songwriter, classic rock
Yeah.
stuff. That was all always happening. But as far as like really considering myself a composer, that wasn't until really after college, and it kind of just blew up. And I love it, and I've run with it, and it's been a great thing. It's been a great outlet. It's definitely a way I feel I can connect with God and with other people. It's always
Yeah.
really important to me to feel like I can express myself well. And so I spend a lot of time when I'm writing a piece, trying to figure out exactly what the message is I'm trying to accomplish. And I actually feel better, if I can express myself, through music. It's something that is actually really important to me. And I didn't realize that was one of the reasons I really loved it until much later.
Yeah, I was telling you this before we started recording, but I did dabbled in composition, studied a little bit of composition in college as well, and I found now that I'm writing more literally, like 'cause I write nonfiction, and so it's very like the words there's not so much left up for interpretation.
Right.
But I always thought it was really cool, like finding a way to express what you're trying to express through this really interesting means of communication that like if you're trying to evoke a particular emotion or tell a particular story, but you can't just say
Yeah.
what it is. I mean, like lyrics,
Yeah.
you have a little license there to be a little bit more,
Literal.
yeah, I guess.
I mean, what I love about music is that you actually, I mean, you obviously have lyrics sometimes, but music itself is a directly emotional experience. Like
Yeah.
a sound evokes an emotion, and it's literally my job to stockpile as many different sounds so that I can come up with, the full spectrum of emotions.
Well, you talked a little bit about your family and the role that they played in your musical career. Can you talk a little bit about what life was like for you growing up?
Yeah, I mean, we had a happy family for sure. I have one older brother. He's about 20 months older, and he and my dad growing up, they were my like superheroes, And I remember he got married, wow, 5 years ago, June. And at his wedding, I gave a speech. Well, I thought it was a speech. When I said speech, he corrected me. He said, "Think of it more as a toast." I was
Yes.
like, okay, well, all right.
Toast.
So I'll cut out
Short and sweet.
50 pages or so. I told him the truth, and I said, well, just so you know, there's the three men I admire most on this planet are Jesus, Dad, and you. And, I didn't tell him that growing up because he's my brother. You get
Yeah.
a big head about it. And
Yeah.
So
He would be insufferable.
yeah. Exactly. I mean, so, you never say those things as a younger brother or whatever. But, at his wedding, it seemed like a good time. And I really did. I don't even think I realized, how much I was trying to emulate them
Yeah.
until much later. My dad really was the gold standard as far as like doing what I wanted to do with my life, which was, he was chasing his dreams and his passions, and he found success on a very, very large scale. But he also managed to be a great husband and father, and there was no like, we always had dinner with him every night, and
Yeah.
that's not a story I always heard about. Oh, these musicians, these brilliant musicians or whatever, but they have no home life, they have no family life.
Yeah.
And that was never a thing with him. He had success, and it was amazing, but I knew that the success was secondary, to being a family man, and so that was like what I wanted to emulate, and that was it was a big thing. And I also definitely wanted to emulate his approach, to anything. My dad is not because of he's my dad, but because of how he handles stress and problems. I would love to be able to do it like he does. I mean, I am entirely confident that if I was in a hostage situation in Germany or something, and I called my dad, and told him, he would say okay, and he would hang up the phone, and within 10 minutes he'd have a plan to
Yeah.
get me back. I mean,
Right.
that's just, I don't think I can raise his pulse if I had a gun to his head.
Right.
He's just
Very
even keel.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that seemed to me to be such an amazing attribute. When I was in high school, well, actually, I was a freshman in college. Our house burned down, and my mom, when there was a fire, it was in Ocean Grove. It's well documented. Really horrible fire. They actually said they would have lost the town if it hadn't been raining.
Wow.
And my mom, when we were told to leave, immediately got in the car and started driving the wrong way down a one-way street. So my dad had to stop her from driving, get out, and then he drove and was able to keep things even keel. And that kind of, in a nutshell, it was like he always had the answer, even in the most stressful situation. So I really, really wanted to emulate that if I could. But the catch was, I didn't seem to have that kind of temperament. I was more. My dad was a leader. He was very confident, very logical, and I was very soft-spoken and not very comfortable leading or talking to people. And I also am a very emotions-first person, which is helpful in music. But for a long time, I didn't think it was actually helpful in real life. For me, everybody told me I was super talented, or whatever, or that they really admired that, or they really admired that I was thinking about my emotions or whatever, but they didn't actually treat me in a way that showed that they respected me because of that. And that was something that was really took me a long time to get over. Initially there was just this real frustration with being an emotions first guy. It's okay to be an emotions first girl or woman.
Right,
I mean,
right.
that's kind of stereotypically what's expected.
Right.
So it's really frustrating to be an emotions first guy. And it's even more frustrating, I think, when you're growing up and you're not aware of, I mean, now that I'm a little bit older, I can look back on it and understand the dynamics from like a, kind of a third person perspective. But growing up as a kid, you're just like, well, this sucks.
Yeah. Yeah. You don't have like a concept of, I don't know, because you see these men that you respected and wanted to emulate being something different than what you were.
Yeah, I was much more like my mom, and she's very emotions first. I mean, she walks into a room, you know how she's feeling. It's just it's on her face.
Yeah.
And that is it took me a long time to realize that that's actually still a wonderful thing. And her emotions and all of those things are really a perfect complement to my dad, and the two of them together, they have a wonderful marriage. But as a guy, all I saw growing up was that I was more like my mom, but it wasn't helpful. I only saw the situations where it wasn't helpful to have too much emotion, right? It's not helpful to get super stressed out or be super emotional over a business decision because you need to make the right decision, and if you let your emotions go, then it'll go the wrong way.
Right.
It's you would think it would be helpful in dating to have a lot of emotions,
Right.
but it's not, especially when you're a young kid. And you're kind of like, emotions. I have all these emotions. Let me tell you how I feel. And then, of course, because you're young and nobody ever talks about that, you end up actually freaking people out.
Yeah.
So it definitely is not something that I liked. So it was definitely a learning curve. It also didn't help. I loved growing up in Ocean Grove. It's a beautiful town. But it didn't help. The church there was rightly very focused on pointing out kind of the errors that we have in society have made with gender roles, and was very, very good about talking about, equality in the gospel between men and women. But how it got practiced in my friend group was not very helpful at all,
Yeah.
because they were actually, in practice, there was a lot of, we're not just equal, but we're the same. And that was really confusing because, especially as a guy who was pretty emotions first, I ended up hanging out with a lot of girls who then would end up treating me like one of their girlfriends.
Yeah.
And just like, that's not, there is still differences, and there still are things, and I wanted them to acknowledge that, especially as a guy. It's like, and it would kill me too that a lot of times they would talk, even in New York. I moved here 5 years ago, and one of the first places I went, that was a Bible study, was a bunch of super attractive women and then like three guys.
Right.
And I was like, well, this is great. I'm going to go here.
Yeah.
And very quickly, it was like all these women started complaining that there weren't any
Yeah.
available Christian men
Yep.
who were like godly
Yep.
and like attractive. And, it's like, thanks.
Right.
And so again, in their conversations, they just kind of start treating you, like I said, like you're one of their girlfriends, and that was, it really kind of did a number on me, growing up, just because I felt like I'm trying so hard to be, a man, hopefully a godly man, but there's no recognition of this, that is any different than being a godly woman. Like, we can just talk, we can all be friends, and, personal boundaries apparently aren't a thing,
Yeah. Right.
And it's just like, okay, and then at the end you feel disrespected, as a guy. It was a lot to kind of work through, for sure.
Yeah, that's something that I notice among not just female friends, but some of my female friends, in just how, I don't know, it's in the dating world, it can be kind of easy to play the blame game as long as you're not the one.
Yeah.
Like, that's the problem.
Of course.
Right? And so it's like, oh, they're just like, aren't any men, or like I don't know, they're not stepping up in the right way.
Yeah.
And you kind of like have to, I don't know, for me, I had to really take a moment and be like, okay, wait, is that true? And also, like, am I like, I'm a very aloof person.
Right.
And so I'm like, that probably is not very encouraging to most men. And so, like, really having to own my side of things.
Right.
Where, like, okay, I am frustrated by these things. What is actually in my control? How am I maybe contributing to this, like, just very unhelpful situation where, like, especially if you're in a Bible study group together, you're in a friend group together, and the church is like not that big, or the friend group isn't that big, it's definitely risky to like try to, like, I don't know, I feel like you can fall into that, oh, these are just my friends kind of mindset, which is like good that, I mean, in where my experience has been that, like, men and women cannot be friends. So it's nice to have like the counter to that we can be friends, but also, like, I'm only friends with a lot of people.
And I think too, the other thing is, friendship is great between guys and girls, but there's still differences and boundaries to be respected.
Yeah.
I remember, this is growing up in high school, when it was really bad. They'd call me up and say, hey, do you want to have like girl time? And I'd be like, what? Why would I
want to do that?
Yeah. And
like, I'm not a girl.
And and the other thing, and none of this was in like a, probably today you have to specify, none of this was in like a like homosexual or like any type of that way. It just was like they didn't see any like anything wrong with just inviting me to go like vent with a bunch of girls.
Yeah.
And that I contributed to it myself, to be fair, because I was just really lonely.
Yeah.
And I'm looking for friendship wherever, at that time, especially for me, trying to figure out how I fit into everything.
Yeah.
And so it can be interesting, trying to work through all of that.
Yeah. Trying to work through all of it in real time and be like, oh, wait, actually, that maybe was a boundary that I should have set, or like, it's very tricky. And I don't know, I think there's wisdom in taking a step back and reflecting always, and like reading books and whatever. But also there's just so much that you have to learn just by doing it.
Well, yeah.
Which can be, for me, it's very frustrating because I'm like a little bit of a control freak.
Well, I mean, so am I. One of the things that I noticed, so as a guy, I was listening to many women say like, no men are like stepping up and like asking me out, or like no men are stepping up and like taking control and like owning how they feel. So I was like, okay, fine, I'll step up and be like, hey, like, do you want to go out? And then they would have this like just mystified look on their face, and they'd be like, oh, I didn't mean like you,
Yeah.
Well, and that was always really like really hurtful, because it showed that like how clearly they weren't aware of the messages they were sending.
Yeah.
What happened for me was that I internalized that to be a man was to have a woman who was romantically interested in you. And obviously, because I was young and dumb, it had to be a beautiful woman who was interested in you, right? Who you were also interested in. That actually made you a man. Now, I was smart enough to know that actually is entirely stupid.
Yeah.
I would never have said that to anybody, because I was raised in a place where I was like, I know that is just false.
Yeah.
But it took me a long time to learn that like my head and my heart operate on very different operating systems.
Yeah.
And I was stupid enough to think that because I was smart enough to know the answer, that meant that I solved it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so that was definitely something that just, took a long time to learn, and still learning it.
Yeah, for real. And to get to a point where for me it's been, okay, what do I say that I want in a relationship versus what am I actually going after? Right? Because they're not necessarily the same, right? We can have this idealized version of what we want, whether it's physical attractiveness or whatever quality or that is ideal for you. But then for me, like getting very honest about like the patterns that I would find myself in and who I would be attracted to, because they were like absolutely, and still like to a certain extent, not the healthiest people to be around. But it's like, I like kept getting frustrated because I was like, wait, why am I like finding myself in the same thing over and over again? Like it's because I say that I want this, and maybe I'm like projecting that onto this person who like is going to treat me the way that I think I should be treated, which is like not very well at all.
So very early on in my life, I had a crush on the prettiest girl in town that like at some point everybody in town had a crush on. And I spent, ages like stressing about like, should I ask her out? How am I going to ask her out? Am I going to do it perfectly? And like, and at the end of the day, I asked her out and she said no. And I was like super crushed. And so I kind of was like, well, screw that. Like, if I'm kind of interested, I'm just going to ask.
Not like build it up into this whole big thing.
And then like, if they say no, I'll be like, okay, that road kind of closed. Not that it doesn't suck, but like that road closed, but I hadn't gone too far down it, and it was really frustrating because also when I would ask women and I would, tell them that, or in a more likely context, if I had just been turned down by a woman or something, and I was in a community group where I was giving an update, it's like, hey, I asked her out, she said no, but again, I figured she, whatever. I didn't put a lot into it.
Right.
And they'd all be like, oh, well, that's so brilliant and so mature. And that's like how dating should be.
Right.
And they would all say that. And then, when I would ask them, they would all say no. And, again, like they have every right to like reject me. I'm not saying they should have dated me or whatever.
Right.
But the amount of times it happened made me think it was more than just them not being interested in me. I was curious about like what are they actually believing about dating, and it was really frustrating to always hear, because women, I don't envy you. Like your job sucks. If you get asked out and you don't want to date the guy, like you have this awful feeling, right?
Yeah.
But just go for it and reject the guy. The word like especially several girls, it's like they read the same like text chain or something. They would go on this long explanation of how they like seriously valued me
Yeah.
and thought that I was like a dear, sweet person.
Yeah.
But then they didn't see me like that.
Right.
And that was actually super frustrating because it was actually not helpful to hear them say everything they like about me. Because what they were really saying is, I like everything about you, but I don't see you this way. And part of this is my own brokenness, but that helped internalize the message. What I actually heard was like, because everything they were listing was they liked that I was more emotional than other guys, and they liked that I was bold enough to ask them out. They liked everything about me, but except the only thing they didn't say was how I looked. So I interpreted, you like everything about me, but you think I'm not attractive. And like, so that just became kind of, and I know that most of them didn't mean it like that, but as a guy, when you're hearing a woman say all these things that they allegedly like about you, you kind of are left to try and fill in the blanks. And now, that being said, I got asked out by a girl one time, and I was like, "Crap, this sucks." I
Getting like put on the spot. You mean?
Yeah. So I don't mean to any women listeners, like it's not as linear as I first thought. I was like, you guys all just suck. Like,
right.
Like, you like sometimes you're just caught off guard. You didn't expect it. Like, whatever.
Yeah.
I think one thing about that though is like, be more aware who you're complaining to, because like a lot of people were complaining to me, and then when I would step up, they would be surprised that so be a little bit more aware, and it would really help. And the other thing is just shoot them once in the head instead of like 5 times in like various other limbs.
That was a very evocative metaphor that you chose there for that.
I think I took it from Joe Girardi when he was with the Yankees.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he actually had to send a player down to the minor leagues who had actually been playing very well. But this guy came back from the injured list, and he went up to him like right before the game and said, "You're not playing tonight. You're going back to the minor leagues." And he just walked away. And one of the guys was like, "What the heck was that?" Like, he's like, "Trust me, it would not have been any easier if I had drawn out like how good a job he'd done while he was up here." And I really resonated with that. I also like for a girl to just say no, I actually respected that more, because there's nothing you can do to make it better if you don't like somebody,
Yeah.
So just like say no, let them get out of that situation because they're not feeling great. Like let them get out, and that actually, I would have taken that as them respecting me more as a man, instead of like wanting to then talk to me about all these feelings that they were having and why it wasn't a good fit. It was like, what you're saying is you don't like me, so just
say that.
Yeah, and as a guy, and and again, I don't mean to be unfair to any women listeners. It is super awkward, but with my background and already feeling kind of out of place with a lot of other guys because I was very emotional, I would have felt that they respected me much more as a man if they just told me, and that was it.
Yeah, So how do you feel like, I mean, if this is an ongoing process, that's great. But how do you feel like this has maybe been something you've been able to embrace about yourself and work through?
So I mean, honestly, the biggest thing I think for me is a couple of things. One, becoming aware of it,
Yeah.
so that I could at least know what it is. When I'm a kid growing up, I'm not processing, verbally like, oh, I am more emotionally like my mother, and I would prefer to
Right.
be more emotionally like
Right.
and that of course complicates everything because then you don't even know
Right.
what's going on.
Right.
And I spent a really long time. Combinations of therapy were very helpful, but
Yeah.
also there was an emotional regulation group through my church, and that sounds like cruel and inhumane torture, but was actually very very helpful in terms of just staying in the moment and realizing what emotions you're reacting to when you're reacting, because it's very frequently not the emotions that you would expect.
Yeah.
And so that just going through that process, and once again, when I joined, I was the only guy, and I was like, "This is literally this like
This is my life.
this is yeah,
Yeah.
this is the worst possible thing."
Yeah.
Finally, there were a couple other guys that joined, and I mean, but it was really helpful to see other people struggling, with that. And I do very consciously believe too that being more in touch with or more comfortable talking about emotions at any rate, I mean, that really does help me as a musician. The real change has been meeting people who respect me as a man, men and women. I found that in community group Bible study at church. I met guys who were cool and Christian, good guys.
Yeah.
I also met a lot of musician guys who are generally, because of the music thing, a little more
Yeah.
emotional or whatever. So seeing that I wasn't the only one was really helpful.
Yeah.
And then just meeting women who, it's even if we weren't romantically, like they weren't romantically interested in this, I still felt like they were treating me like, a guy. And as a peer, not so much. What I always called it was the little brother syndrome. I do not want to be your little brother, right?
Right.
I know I'm your brother in Christ, but we're like, we're at the same,
Yeah.
so
Yeah. It's not like a diminutive
yeah,
thing.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And definitely as the youngest child, there was a lot of little brothering
Yeah.
to go around. So I was sick of it, but really meeting people who I felt respected me as a guy, and
Yeah.
that freed me up from trying to find all that respect in a single person. If I've got
Yeah.
multiple friends and multiple guy and girlfriends, I haven't found one who has like, is treating me like a guy and is also romantically interested in me. And that's how I know, but I know plenty of girls who are, you know, we're down to hang out and have a good time. And they are very clear about, you know, boundaries and stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't like to hang out with them until I know, well, try not to be this stark about it, but I'm uncomfortable hanging out
Yeah.
until I know, like, hey, like, do they have a boyfriend? Like, is there some clear divider that shows this is not going to be a weird gray area where, like,
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
started
Yeah.
hanging, and I don't know. I mean, it's not like a rule. It's not that I don't want to hang out with women one on one, but I try to not leave myself open to, like,
Yeah.
an emotional situation just through, whatever circumstance.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, all of that's been really helpful, I think, as far as just going through.
Yeah. Well, that's really great. To wrap up, I have a couple of things. The first is, will you tell me one thing that's hard right now and one thing that's great?
Yeah, maybe the same thing. So I've been dating a really lovely woman, Victoria, and it is very hard but also really great. The things I am learning about myself now that I'm actually in a dating relationship.
Yeah.
I remember like after a couple dates where she had challenged me on some stuff, and said like, "Hey, why do you do this or whatever?" And I answered her, and was like, "Oh, that's kind of a crappy answer. I need to change
Yeah.
this." And,
Yeah.
and I went to my dad and my brother because we talk all the time. We're very close. I'm very close with my mom too, by the way. Hi, mom. We have dinner like once a week or something, and
Right.
so very close. And I am much more well adjusted than I was as a small child, so it's less traumatic.
One would hope.
Yes,
Yes.
yes. Well, so but in any event, when I was talking to them, I said she like got on my case about this, and their response was like, "Good, somebody needs to." And I was like, "What do you mean? Like, why didn't you tell me?"
Yeah, right? You've just been annoyed by this thing all these years and you haven't said anything?
Yeah, it's like, what the heck? I mean, so actually, one of the biggest things was sarcasm because I am not super comfortable in large social situations.
Sure.
So, and one of the things that I default to is performance mode. Like I'm on stage, I
Yep.
am on whatever.
Yep.
And so I'll have a lot of jokes ready to go that are like totally not like I rehearse them before I go there, but I've got like a stockpile.
You've got your stories.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
The ones that you know are going to land.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they're great, by the way.
Yeah.
If we ever do a follow up where you want plenty of stories.
Yeah. We'll just have your whole list of stories
Yeah,
that
yeah.
you save for parties so that
Yeah.
the rest of us introverts can take them.
Exactly. And you can just change a couple names.
Yeah, right. Make it applicable to your situation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so I would have, and some of them would just be really sarcastic. And I am sarcastic by nature.
Yeah.
My family has Irish blood, so to show that we love each other, we hate each other.
Right.
And that's just something I'm very comfortable in. But that is not something that a lot of people are comfortable in, especially the opposite gender, if you're just meeting them. And I remember going to a party with Victoria, and some of her friends were there, and I said something sarcastic, and I could tell it didn't land, and I was like, mental note, did not land, sarcasm, done. But she talked to me afterwards, and she was like, "Oh my gosh, I was afraid that like they thought you were a horrible jerk because you said this."
Yeah.
And it was like, okay, so I noted that it didn't land, but I did not have that reaction. But her reaction was so strong that it was like, all right, fair enough. If I don't know who's at the party,
Right.
no sarcasm
Right.
until they get to know me.
Right.
And I remember telling my dad, and he's like, well, duh. And I was like, if you knew this, I mean, I guess, my dad's not coming to the same parties as me.
Right. But still, it's important information.
Yeah, exactly.
I've had to learn that lesson the hard way as well.
Yeah,
of like, oh, right, people don't know that I am not like a sociopath.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And same thing. I told my brother, and he's like, yeah, you needed to hear that. I was like, where have you been?
Yeah.
And so on the one hand, so there are lots of things like that were really good for me to learn. And I love that. But it is very difficult.
Well, PJ, thanks for being here. Why don't you mentioned a little bit at the top of the episode what you have coming up, but why don't you tell us what you have coming up?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm really excited. The deadline I have for tomorrow, I'm sending off an arrangement of You're a Mean One, Mr. Grinch for the Florida Imperial Symphony. That's going to be December 10th in Florida. I'm going to be down there for that. And December 6th, the Boardwalk Jazz Band, we're actually releasing a single.
Oh, nice.
Yes, it's going to be from our TV show, but you'll be able to go on iTunes December 6th and download it. You'll actually be able to go to Spotify probably by the time this airs and pre-order it. That would be great if you all wanted to pre-order it, because the music business is running this brilliant scam for all artists, but independent artists make a ton of use of this. Any download that you download between today and December 6th goes towards our first week of sale totals. So we could actually have like 2 months of totals for our first week And that's how we would get on the Billboard charts.
Yeah.
Which is pretty crazy.
Awesome.
So yeah, go. You can pre-order that on Spotify.
Great. And I'll put a link in the episode description to make it super easy for everyone.
Oh,
so they have no excuses.
Yeah, that's great. You're the best.
I do what I can. Yeah. I know the struggle.
Oh, yeah.
So
are we talking about dating or music?
All of it. Okay. I know all of the struggles.
Okay.
But as a writer, I have my own struggles there as well. Well, PJ, thanks again for being here.
Cool.
Great conversation.
Likewise. Thank you so much.
If you want to support PJ, as he said, a great way to do that is to pre-order his new single. Check the episode description for a link to PJ's website, as well as for PJ's social media handles. You can also see PJ and the Boardwalk Jazz Band live on December 8th in Asbury Park, New Jersey. You'll find info on that show and their televised Christmas show on PJ's website. Thanks for listening. Thanks to PJ for being here. Theme music is by Chad Rollinson and sound editing by Andrew Kim. Unsuitable with Mary B. Seyfried is copyright 2019, Mary B. Seyfried LLC, all rights reserved.